Okay, so once again, good afternoon, everyone, and I believe most of the people are already here. So I would love to welcome you to the second ASUMIE webinar, because this is one of the webinars of our project, which I'm going to introduce in a while to those who are not familiar with it, because I can see that some of the participants are already our partners, so they know the project, and I'm happy to see them here too. But today's webinar should focus on dynamic assessment in a connection of ASUMIE project and of what we are doing. So in a while, I'll start sharing the screen, and I would like to give you some brief information on dynamic assessment, but also to talk about dynamic assessment in context of education and inclusive education, and how it can be used within inclusive education. And I also have some interesting research data, because we conducted some research on dynamic assessment, and I thought it would be worth sharing these data with you, because some of you already know what dynamic assessment is, as I can see, because I can see some names which I know, but maybe it can be interesting to see how dynamic assessment can work and help. Anyway, before I start, I would like to invite you to interrupt me when you want to ask questions or comment anything. I don't know if you all know Zoom, but if you look on the line of down at the bottom of your screen, there is a line with different icons, and one of the icons says reactions. So if you just click on this icon, you can raise your hand there. So if you raise your hand, I can see that you want to say something. There will be definitely a space for discussion at the end of the webinar, but I would like to have the webinar a bit more lively. So maybe it's sometimes interesting if we just discuss at the moment when we talk about something interesting, or when you have something in your mind and when it's relevant to a slide which I'm just showing or something like that. So so just feel free to interrupt me and ask or comment whenever you have something in your mind. And on the other hand, if you're not talking, please keep your microphones off, switched off, because otherwise it can actually make a bit of mess, and then the sound can be a bit complicated. You know, it's the online, this is the bad side of the online webinars, that the signal is not always the good one. But on the other hand, I'm very happy that thanks to online webinar, I can actually welcome people from all different countries, and I now welcome you all to Prague, because I'm actually having this webinar from Prague, and so I would love to have you here, have you all here, but at least you can have the feeling that you are somehow in Prague at this moment. Anyway, okay, I'll start sharing the screen now, and I'll start with the presentation. But as I said, just interrupt me whenever you think I can tell you something interesting, or you can add anything. If you can add anything interesting to what I'm saying, it'll be also fine. Can you see the screen now? Can you see the presentation? Just, yeah, I can see. I can see nodding those who have camera on. Yeah, and I should actually, I should hear something in the chat. So yes, you're just saying yes, that's great. And I should actually send regards from Daniela, who's my colleague, and we prepared the presentation and the webinar together, but she's having another online webinar today, and she's had 8 hours of online webinar, so I just told her I would manage this webinar on my own, because she's already exhausted, and unfortunately this week is a bit complicated for us, because we have another dynamic assessment course for the whole week actually. So So the topic of today's today's webinar is dynamic assessment as a support tool in inclusive education. And before I start, I would just like to introduce very briefly, or mention very briefly, the project goals, because you are now in a ASUMIE webinar, which is an international project, and our goal, or the goals of the project, are enrich and support and broaden professional skills of all the people who are involved in inclusive education. And the focus, or the way how to support these people, is especially via mediation, via development of cognitive competencies and all this. And I'm saying this just very briefly because it is tightly linked to dynamic assessment. But now let's have a look at another picture. And I would like you to imagine a child who has different mother tongue, or maybe a child who is emotionally deprived, or a child who has just arrived from a different country and he or she is in your school or at your counseling center, because I know that you are from all different places and institutions. Or maybe imagine a child who has had many assessments done before, and none has really explained why he or she is facing difficulties at school. For some reason, the child has difficulties at school, and the assessment just still keeps on saying, or the outcomes of the assessment just keep on saying the same results. They prove the results, but it doesn't explain the problem. Or maybe imagine a child who is an underachiever at school. It means the results of standard assessment show the child should work much better. The child has the potential, but for some reason, the results, the school achievements, are not so high as they should be. Or maybe imagine a child from socially disadvantaged environment. I can imagine that each of you knows at least one kind of these children, that you probably work with some of these children. Maybe some of you have met and work with all these children most of your work days. And now the question is, what shall we do with these children if standard tests, no matter whether standard psychological tests or standard educational tests, show some results, but don't tell us how to work with these children? Or maybe this is another big issue. Can we assess these children with standard tests? Because those tests are prepared for standard population, for intact population, for population from our country. They have standards, they have norms, but the norms were created according to normal common population of our country. And suddenly we have a child who maybe is not from our country, or maybe the child has such a complicated background and such a complicated history that it doesn't really correspond with the with standard assessments. So and well, when we talk about standard assessment, either educational or psychological, it really is something what has a big value, and what is very common. It's a very common way how to work with children in all countries. Sometimes some countries are even more famous for their standardized tests and for very strict norms. But these tests can be used for most of the children, but then we have children who just don't fit into the pattern, who don't fit into the metrics. And the results of these standard tests just don't show appropriate results. You can see it when you talk to a child, when you see how a child reacts, and you can see that there is a big gap between what he or she says, how he or she behaves, and between the results of these tests. For some reason, the tests just don't show real information about the children. I will just stop sharing for a while, and I would like to have a look at you and ask you if you have experience with such children, if you have clients, if you have pupils, where you can see that the results of ordinary tests at school or at counseling centers just don't show what the children are really about. Can you imagine such clients? Can you imagine such pupils? Some of you are nodding, some those who have a camera on. Maybe you have real experience, maybe very current experience with such children. Any comments? No. I know it's difficult to comment and to get involved into discussion when you are in a group of people and you don't know each other. So, okay, here's something in a chat, so I'll just have a look. It's children who are from This is something what is actually very common nowadays. You know, when the standardized tests were created more than 100 years ago, the schools were mostly actually crowded with people from one nation, from one country. The mixture of all people from all different countries wasn't so big, and the people didn't travel so much. The people didn't move from one place to another place. At the beginning of the 20th century, we certainly didn't have so many bilingual or monolingual children as we have now. So all the standards for these tests were created at a time when it was quite common that you just have children from your country in your school. Most of the children were from this country, and you could say that if this test works for other children, it should work for all of them. Or if the norms were created, it should work for all of them. But at this moment, you can meet I'm sorry, I don't remember the name now, but yeah, as Luana mentions here in the chat, at this moment, you can meet people, children from all different countries, from all different backgrounds, and they are all in one school, in one situation, and they should all learn the same subjects. Basically, I will continue the presentation. So I'm not saying that we have solution for everything, definitely not. But one of the answers to the question how to work with such children, how to react to such children, is the dynamic assessment. Because dynamic assessment is assessment which asks, what is the learning potential of a child? Sometimes very easily, but I quite like this explanation because it is a very easy explanation based on traditional perspective, traditional concepts. Because sometimes we say, in context of Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, we sometimes say and we explain that dynamic assessment assesses the zone of proximal development. It means it doesn't assess current state, current knowledge, but it assesses the zone where important others, significant others, especially educators or more experienced peers, can impact a child. This is the zone where a child can develop, they can flourish if they have input from other people, if they have if they are in the interaction with other people and they develop in the interaction with other people. So the dynamic assessment actually asks a question: how can we develop this potential? How far can a child develop if he or she has someone who would support him, who would teach him, or who would guide him, who would actually build him a sort of scaffolding. And actually this is something what is very common at schools, because when you have children at schools, they are never alone. They should always be in the interaction with some other people. So it's nothing what is just a dream. It's something what we can say, if you do this, if the educator works in a certain way, if you support the kid in a certain way, if you focus on particular cognitive functions, or if you work in a particular way, the child will develop further. The potential is there, and the child just needs to be supported from some other people from outside, which should be just something what is quite common for schools. It's not nothing very unusual or weird, because children are always in interaction with others when they are at school. But some children just need stronger support and more intense support from some others, from assistants, from remedial teachers, or from some other professionals. So another characteristic of dynamic assessment is that it assesses individual changes. So it doesn't compare the individual with many others, with a common norm, but it asks how a child behaves on its own, on his own, on her own, and how a child behaves, how the child solves a problem when he or she is in the interaction with other people. So we are interested, when we do the dynamic assessment, we are interested in an individual changes, in the way how children can change. Which actually means, and it is tightly linked to another characteristic which is written here, that when we do dynamic assessment, we definitely believe that cognition is a modifiable trait. It's not a state. It's nothing what is given for sure. It's something what can be changed, what can be modified when we work with children. And it's nothing what we just believe. It's an empirical fact. Nowadays, we already know, we know it from neurological studies, but we also know it from psychological studies, that cognition can be modified. And we know that we have some limits, but we never know what the limits are. And when we talk about children at school, we talk about children at the phase of big development. They are developing. They are not. We are all adults now, and some of us maybe are on the other way than development. But but children develop. They are in the period of their life when the development is just something what is normal for them. They all change, and we sometimes we just need to know how to just a bit push the development, how to help them to change their way of thinking. Well, and this is tightly connected with the way how the dynamic assessment is conducted, how it is done, because it always focuses on process, not on results. So we are not that much interested in scores. Most of dynamic assessment methods even don't have the standard scores. But what we are really interested in is the whole process. So when you do the dynamic assessment, you are in a very strong interaction with the kid. You always have to react to his or her needs. You have to focus on what the child is doing. You still have to think about the way how you interact and how you can support a child. And in fact, I have to say that this is one of the things why I really like the dynamic assessment, because it's very interactive, it's very lively, and you never know what happens, because a child comes to your office or to maybe to a classroom, and when you do the dynamic assessment, and you just give some hints to a child, and a child reacts, or when a child gives you the answer, you always ask, and why did you decide to give this answer? And how do you mean it? What do you think? Even when a child makes a mistake, we try to correct the mistake together. And we also ask why the child has made the mistake, because it's really interesting, because the mistake is a very important source of information for us. Because when a child makes a mistake, it means that we probably have found some of his deficient functions. But on the other hand, when we work together, we can see how a child can get to the correct answer. And then we can see how a child can learn from this experience. So discussion about mistakes, discussion about correct answers. This is an inevitable part of the whole dynamic process. And in fact, it's quite a big fun, because when you work with children, it varies. Each assessment is different. Each work is different, because each child has her or his individual needs. And this is the last statement which you see here, that the assessment always adjusts to a child's needs. So this very brief way, this is the way how to explain what dynamic assessment is. I know that some of you are very well familiar with the dynamic assessment. So maybe I'll just stop sharing for a while. And is there anyone who wants to add anything or ask anything? Maybe I have omitted some of the important aspects of the dynamic assessment. No questions, no comments. Yeah, Jan, was just says that in the chat that you can see a lot of similarity with coaching. Yeah, this is what I get. Thank you for this comment. And I can see Benno has raised his, and I will just comment to what Jan has said, because this is what I actually haven't mentioned. The dynamic assessment, it's an assessment. So the aim of the assessment is to say what the potential is, what are the deficient functions, what are the deficient areas, but also what is the way how to support and how to change these deficient areas into the developed areas. So we still talk about assessment, but a very important part of this assessment is the intervention, actually. So dynamic assessment always actually combines both assessment and also intervention, and in this way it can certainly be somehow similar to coaching too. Benno, you wanted to say something. Nice to see you.
Hello, Lenka, and all the other people, participants. I was asking myself, can you give an example of dynamic assessment in the classroom?
Yeah. Well, in a classroom, it's always a bit more difficult than when you work individually. But one of the ways how to assess kids in the well, usually the way when we work in classrooms, or when other people work in classrooms, the dynamics assessment can have a character of screening. And you can see that some kids need more individual assessment afterwards. But what you can actually do, and when you work with the whole group, with the whole class, it's always good to divide the assessment into three quite concrete steps, which are often they are called pre-test, intervention, and post-test. And a very sort of easy way how to conduct the dynamic assessment in the classroom is that you can just, in a pre-test, you just give all the kids some tasks. I don't want to say a test, but you can just give them a task. Solve this, tell me how you think it, or write this, think about. It can be a math problem, or it can be a language problem, it can be a science problem, anything. And you see the results of pre-test when you just they write something or they draw something. It's up to you. It depends on the way how you do the pre-test, what the task is. And then when they finish the pre-test, there is that important intervention phase. And when you are in a classroom with all the kids, you can actually just discuss with them. It's very nice way how to work with kids, when you share ideas, when a teacher just doesn't teach, but they discuss the results. They discuss the way how they have come to the results. They also emphasize the important information in a task. They describe their strategies and how they worked with the task. And the teacher is the one who moderates this discussion and gives some other ideas. And you always need to know more than the kids, so you have to be ready to offer strategies. You have to be ready to guide them. And what is actually very important, this is one of very important skills when you do the dynamic assessment, you have to be good at asking questions, because dynamic assessment is very often based on questions. You don't teach the kids, you don't give them ready-made strategies, but you discuss with them and you ask them, and this is the way how you guide them, and they can process the ideas in their mind. They can come to some outcomes. And sometimes you need to be a bit more you need to give very detailed questions. You have to ask about different details, because otherwise the kids cannot just move further. Sometimes one question is just enough and the kids start talking. So it really depends. But what you can do in a class, when you do this intervention phase and you discuss and you finalize this intervention phase and you revise with kids what they have learned, what strategies they can use to work on a problem, you explain with them different concepts. This is also very important, because sometimes the kids just don't know the concepts. And if you explain, if you just give them appropriate verbal tools, they know what how to understand the words, which they, for some reason, they didn't know them, they didn't understand. So you summarize all this, and then you can give a post test, or you can give this post test the other day, actually. And the post test should be very similar to pre-test, or sometimes in some cases it can actually be the same task or very similar task, a parallel task, which you gave in the pre-test. And when you compare the results of pre-test and post-test, you can see how far the children can get through the intervention when you explain certain things. And when you work in a class, you will definitely get different results from different kids. But maybe at this point you can see that some of the kids just needed very brief support. They just needed to focus on certain things. Or maybe you can notice in a class that some kids ask about particular words because they didn't understand the instruction. And when you explained the instruction to them, when you discussed the instructions with them, suddenly they could solve the problem. So you can the very important role of the teacher or of the assessor is to observe kids, and also it is always important to reflect what you have done through the intervention, how far you had to go, what kind of interventions you did to particular kids or just in a class as a whole. But when you compare the results of pre-test and post-test, you can actually guess what the potential of the whole class is. And also you can see particular kids, and you can see that some of the kids just go 100% further, or their scores get double. Or sometimes you can see that the kids have big difficulties, and maybe these kids really need some stronger individual support. But this can be actually quite, it sounds complicated, but in fact when teachers get used to it, I think it's quite easy, because you just you have to think about the questions, you have to think about strategies, but it can be implemented in a class. It's important actually to say that this is the way how not only psychologists, not only special educators, but also teachers can actually assess. There are just different ways how to do the assessment. And Rafaela says the process is very important for children and for teacher too. Yes, and the mediation that teacher gives. Exactly, and mediation is one of part of our project. So dynamic assessment is just very tightly linked to that. Yeah, and this is actually what I've already said, that the whole dynamic assessment